Maybe you're looking to open your first salon, or you're a salon owner expanding to your second or third location. Kudos to you. Well, your lease is definitely one document you don't want to skim over. So today we're going to talk about different types of commercial leases.
Be strong.
Once you've found the perfect location to rent for your salon or spa, the next crucial step is to negotiate a commercial lease agreement. But before you proceed, it's essential to be familiar with the different types of leases that are out there. It's up to you to find your own legal advisor and have a professional help you. So just note that I'm not legal advice. I'm just here I've done the research and I can give you stories of my personal experiences, but it's up to you to get your own professional legal advice. Okay. All right. So let's dive in. So let's talk about the different types of leases. First of all, there's a percentage lease. And if you never heard of these, they're not typically common in like retail strip malls. They're mostly done if you're in a mall situation, like if you're in a shopping mall, because what they are, you'll pay a certain percentage of your sales on top of your base rent. So typically you pay the base rent up front, and then you add the percentage based on the previous month's sales. And this type of lease is common in retail spaces and malls. And if you're a tenant that's going to be joining in, like in a retail space, like that's got a ton of different shopping retail spaces, and it's drawing in a crowd, that's the reason why you would sign one of these. Because what's going on is the landlord helps the tenant attract greater traffic flow because they put together businesses that'll attract the same consumers. And so they can walk from one store to another: coffee shop, clothing store, hair salon. You get my picture, right? Just like a shopping center. So that's why they do this, because they're the ones advertising for the consumers to come in to you. But on the other hand, you as the tenant, as your revenue increases, it benefits the landlord. You could see how that is, right? So a percentage lease is structured so the landlord is entitled to a portion of your revenue because they're getting the consumers to you. If you make a greater number of sales because of the foot traffic under this type of lease, you'll be obligated to give the landlord a portion of that income. I know, doesn't sound very good. I one time looked at a space in a mall, and it was a very popular mall. Yeah, I know malls are going out, but and I looked at this lease, and to me, I didn't like it. It didn't set well with me, but it works for a lot of businesses. So, all right, how does the percentage work in this type of lease? Okay, first of all, you have your base rent, and this includes just a certain amount of base rent, and it's a minimum monthly rent that must be paid to continue using the space, right? So it's a certain dollar amount per square foot. So for example, a lease might specify the base rent is $10 per square foot, and you have a 5,000 square foot space, big salon. With those terms, you'd be obligated to pay $50,000 in rent per year. But you divide that by 12, and that comes to a little bit over $4,000 a month. Does that make sense? That's how when you see a property that says $17 per square foot or $20 per square foot, that's how you calculate it. You do the amount per square foot times the square footage, and that would give you the amount for the year. Okay, that's not per month. And then you divide it by 12. So in this percentage lease agreement, this base rent has to be paid regardless of anything else that happens, okay? It's the minimum amount that you're paying monthly. Okay, after the base rent, there's a break-even point. Okay, so typically with a percentage lease, the property owner won't start taking a percentage until a certain amount or a certain number of gross sales has been met. And this amount is usually in a dollar figure, and it's known as the break-even point. And there's two ways you can define this, and you have to really look at your lease to make sure you're defining it how you want to sign it. Okay, there's an artificial break-even point and there's a natural break-even point. The artificial break-even point is when you and your landlord just agree on a flat amount above which a percentage of any income will be given to the landlord as additional rent. For example, you might agree any amount over, say, $50,000 a month is subject to the percentage rent. So anything that you make over $50,000, then you would take a percentage of that, and that would be added to your rent. And on the other hand, a natural break-even point, the base rent is divided by the agreed upon percentage of income that would be paid to the landlord. So a lot of small business owners prefer to use the natural break-even point over the artificial one because it ensures the break-even point will be over the amount of gross sale income required to pay the base rent. Okay, so finally, the percentage rent also needs to be negotiated. This number is typically just a flat percentage. It represents the amount of income over the break-even point that will be given to the landlord as additional rent. For instance, the landlord and you might agree on 6% of any gross sales above the break-even point. And that's what you're negotiating. You could be 5, 4, 10, I don't know. So what to consider with this type of lease, this percentage lease? You want to go over things like the lease term and who's responsible for paying what operating expenses. Okay, so as the tenant in general, if you're the person signing the lease, you want a low base rent and a high break-even point. But you're going to be forced to choose between the two. So choosing a higher break-even point is usually more beneficial to you. This is really true for a new small business owner because it allows you to profit at lower gross sales amounts. You'll also want to negotiate what type of revenues are considered subject to your percentage of rent. So is your retail subject to it? Is it just your services? What about if people returned any returns? Are gift certificates subject to that? Because if you sell gift certificates, that isn't revenue for that month. It's future revenue, right? So, or actually it is revenue for that month, but your future revenue hasn't happened yet. You just need to make sure that you're including all of that in this type of lease. If you're going into a mall situation, this might be the type of lease you're looking at. Really, really talk to your legal counsel on making sure you're getting a fair deal. Okay, so many people go under, and you don't want to sign a lease for so many years and just be not making any money. I mean, you're not in it it is fun, but you're not in it for the fun. You want to make money as a small business owner. All right, let's talk about net leases. Okay, the most two common ones, are double net lease and triple net lease. Okay, under a double net lease, you're responsible for covering your landlord's taxes and insurance costs. And this is really common. Okay, so you have a base rent and then they add in the taxes and the insurance costs. So the term double, it actually means two extra expenses. Okay, the landlord's still held responsible for the structural maintenance expenses, but each month that landlord will receive the base rent plus these additional payments, and it'll be spelled out in your lease. And this is really truly a very, very common lease. I've signed that before. I've also signed a triple net lease too. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the double net, it actually works in your benefit because it's kind of like you own the property without actually having legal title over it. That means that as a tenant, you're actually paying the rent and any other costs associated with the property. Okay. Yes, it includes the insurance, the property taxes, the utilities, the maintenance and repairs, and any other operational costs. So most landlords, they generally will negotiate like a lower rent payment because you're actually taking care of these other costs. And like I said, it is the most common type of commercial real estate lease, especially with properties with multiple tenants, like a shopping mall or shopping center strips, the retail spaces. Even if these property taxes and the insurance premiums are considered responsibility of you, the owners should have property taxes passed through themselves to ensure that they're aware of payment issues. So you'll still be going through them. Sorry if that's confusing, but what you're looking for is a base lease, base rent, which is typically, that's what you're going to be negotiating. And then you really can't negotiate the insurance fees and the property taxes because those are set by the government. Okay. They're just passing them to you to pay. All right, let's talk about a triple net lease. You'll see this as, it'll either be called triple N, triple net, in all capitals. They all refer to the same thing. So if you're looking at a space and you see this is what it means. Okay. It means that you have a base rent, and then you're paying 3 types of property expenses: property taxes, insurance premiums, and maintenance fees. A lot of commercial landlords, they favor this because it reduces their risks. I mean, think about it. You're paying all of that. They're not. So, and most of the time, the triple net leases are long-term, usually like 5 or 10 years. Okay. So it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? That you're paying all this. I've signed a triple net lease before, and let me tell you about the pros and cons of this. Okay. The primary benefit of this is you can secure a lower base rent for a longer period of time. That's your negotiating factor, right? So say they advertise it for $20 a square foot, but it's triple net. Most of the time you can go in there and negotiate that base rent. So maybe you get it down to $18 a square foot, but you're still paying the triple net. You still have to pay their taxes, maintenance fees, things like that. The worst thing is that those things go up in price. I signed a lease one time, and over a span of, I think it was a 6-year lease, over the first 3 years, just the first 3 years, my lease went up, I want to say at least a half a dozen times. At least a half a dozen times. And it wasn't the base rent that went up because that was secure. It was all the maintenance fees, the costs to them, their insurance went up. They had CAM fees, which is common area maintenance. If they didn't have full tenants in all of their buildings, they still have to take care of the parking lot and everything. But if they don't have a full house, they're paying the maintenance people. Well, guess what? All the tenants that are in there paying rent have to pay more because they just divided it in between that, whatever. Just be aware that maybe you can set a limit to what that would be, because the last thing you wanted to do is to break your budget. I mean, because increasing property values, it might be a sign that business is booming. Great. But it generates a higher yearly tax bill and higher insurance premiums. So everything goes up. So you might have a solid sign on the dotted line that you have this base rent, but you can't control all of the other three things. So the pros of a triple net lease, you got that low base rent, like I was saying, long-term lease, so they can't raise that lease. And you get tax deductions yourself as a business because you're doing all of the upgrades to your property, things like that. Now, some of the cons of a triple net, like I was saying, the increased maintenance costs, higher tax bills, and then those fluctuating insurance premiums. Oh my gosh. Every time I got a letter from my landlord on this, my heart would just plummet because I knew I was going to be paying more. I mean, it was just leases. It drive me up the wall. But you have to have them unless you buy your own property. And then you're the owner of your property. And I know a lot of salon owners who do that. Kudos to them. But guess what? If anything goes wrong, air conditioning, parking lot, if it snows, you have to shovel all the snow yourself. So there's good and bad. It's good and bad. I mean, you could still write off on your taxes all the things that you spend inside of if you're paying a lease. I mean, you know that, right? Sorry. All right. Let's talk about a couple of those concerns because I've had people ask me this, like in a triple net lease, like who pays for roof repairs? You better have that spelled out in your lease. I guarantee you. One time I signed a lease and the HVAC, even though we had it inspected, in the lease, it said who was responsible for it was not the landlord, the HVAC system. It was me. It was the tenant. And wouldn't you know it, 6 months into it, the whole HVAC system went kapooey. And I had to replace a brand new HVAC system. I think it was like $12,000 because, it's a big units on top of the roof. And lo and behold, when we moved to another space, guess what? You cannot take that HVAC system with you. That is just part of the unit now. Yeah. So make sure you read the fine print on that. Things like that, roof repairs, HVACs. The best lease I had. Wonderful. They were wonderful landlords. And they took care of everything outside of the four walls. So I had to have an HVAC maintenance agreement and I had to, keep, certain things up. But when it came to shoveling the snow or repairing concrete or repairing even locks on the doors, they were on it and they never, ever raised my rent because why? I was a good tenant. So it does pay for that too. All right. So can you negotiate a triple net lease? Yeah. Remember, don't feel like, you are stuck into anything. Everything's negotiable, everything. So you can, if you're looking at a space and it has a triple net lease and it's like, wow, that's a lot. That wasn't in my budget. Just ask if they're open to modifications. Ask if they're willing to work with you. Usually on that base rent, that's you're negotiating. Okay. And then we already covered this, but somebody asked, what does the dollar amount per square foot per year mean? And like I said, so say you were quoted $20 a square foot for 1,000 square foot space. It would be calculated 20 times 1,000 or 20,000 per year. And then you divide that by 12 months to give you your per month, which would be, in this case, 20,000 divided by 12 is 1,667. And that would be your base rate. Okay. Now, another question I've had is commercial property insurance mandatory? Well, laws vary from state to state, but the landlord will likely require it to be part of your lease. Okay, so talk to your business realtor or talk to somebody who in your area that are familiar with your business property insurance and what you have to do. Okay. So if you have questions about a triple net, double net, anything like that, reach out to me, or reach out to your attorney. But it's a lot, right? So let's move on to fully serviced or gross lease. Now, what I mean by this is it's a fixed amount rent that includes almost everything. The landlord assumes responsibility for paying the taxes, the insurance, the common area maintenance, the building maintenance, the service fees. And like the common areas can include restrooms, elevators, hallways, lobbies, parking. What I'm seeing, and I could be wrong on this, but I think like if you were going into a solo suite, this is a fully serviced or gross lease. Okay. It's important to know that these types of leases will be higher, substantially higher than just a base rent. Okay. Because that's what you're paying for. You're paying for all the other stuff. You're paying for that common areas. You're paying for the elevator, your parking, all that stuff, the maintenance of it. And it's all wrapped up in one package and it's easy for you, right? They even take care of the insurance. So you don't even have to get your own business insurance. They do it for you. They make it very easy, but you're going to pay a little bit more per square foot. Just know that up front. Okay. So let's just run this down. Okay. A net lease is the opposite of gross lease. Okay. So a net lease, double net, triple net is complete opposite of a gross lease, which is kind of like the solo situation, right? Under a net lease, you're responsible for some or all of the costs associated with the property, such as the utilities, the maintenance, the insurance, and the others. And with the net leases, you have some control over the costs, but it comes with some increased degree of responsibility. Okay. So whereas the gross leases or the fully serviced leases, the SOLA, you're not responsible for any of that. It's all included. But remember that your landlord's going to probably restrict or prohibit some of the cosmetic changes you want to do. But that's between you and your landlord. So hopefully that kind of tells you the difference between the different leases. So in addition to considering these types of leases, let's talk about some other things you really do need to consider when you're signing your lease. And this is just almost like common sense. First of all, the length of the lease. Okay. And what I'm talking about that is, if you're setting up shop and you plan to invest your space with hair stations and custom furniture and lighting and fixtures, and you're upgrading the plumbing and the electrical systems, and you want to at least secure your lease for at least 5 years, at least, because it takes a lot of money to get it up and going. And at lease term ranging from 5 to 10 years, it's generally recommended because you're going to put a lot into it. This just ensures that you have stability and it minimizes the risk of your rent being increased. Okay. So if you can lock yourself into a 5 or 10-year lease with that base rent locked in, wow, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Plus, if you went to go sell it, make sure that it is a transferable lease. Because that is a selling point. So if maybe you've been doing it for 5, 7 years and you still have 3 years left on your lease and you're locked in at a certain rate and it's transferable, that actually is a great selling point to a new buyer because they don't have to negotiate the lease. So say I'm making this number up, $3,000. They don't have to worry about that. That's already secure. They could budget for that. And then they could go in and talk to the landlord about what it's going to look like 3 years from now, right? Anyway, consider having an option to renew your lease or a contingency to trade up to a larger unit in the same complex. So think about that. Maybe you're growing, and you want your name to be the first that they consider to move to a new, that bigger location. If you're a good tenant, I guarantee you your landlord wants to keep you. Okay. Just know that. Be a good tenant. All right. In there also, you want to have some kind of exit strategy. We kind of hit on this just a little bit. So say you're going along and God forbid a worldwide pandemic happens. Yeah, it's a thing, right? But maybe you just signed a 10-year lease. The pandemic hits 3 years into it. And lo and behold, oh my gosh, what happened to your business or your motivation or whatever? And for whatever reason, your business folds. Okay. Some owners may offer a buyout option, meaning you pay a certain amount to terminate your contract. It needs to be written in there if that's what it is. Some, if they have that in there, they actually usually have a clause that says you're going to allow them to show the property to other people while you're occupying it. You just have to be up for that. But otherwise, if you don't have something like that written in there, you're going to be responsible for the rest of the lease. Yeah. Unless you find somebody to come in and take it over. But that has to be written in there too, because it has to be a transferable lease. You have to get, you actually have to get permission from your landlord to have somebody else take over your lease. And you might have to co-sign that you would be responsible for the lease to the end of the lease period, even if it has a new owner, because you're the one who signed that lease to begin with. And you might be personally liable for the entire lease. And the landlord can come after you personally if your new person doesn't pay for it. But guess what? If you're structured as a LLC or a corporation, which I highly recommend you do, that's where your personal liability ends, except for taxes. So they can't come after you and your house and your family and stuff like that. Now that's worst case scenario, but I'm just telling you, the exit strategy has to be there. Another thing to consider is tenant improvements. Will they allow it? And what are those allowed things that we already kind of hit on? The HVAC, the plumbing, the fixtures. Now, you got to, in the lease, you got to define who's responsible for those. And most of the time, if you do the plumbing, you change the lighting, most of the times you have to keep those on the property, unless it's written in there that if you do leave if you are no longer the tenant, you can remove it all from the premises. I've seen that happen. Most of the time, they want you to keep it there because they want to rent it out to maybe another salon because it's already plumbed, the electricity is already there, all that good stuff. If you take all that down, then the next person has to come in and redo it all, right? So just address all this in your lease. If it's not in there, if it's a basic lease, see if you can put a clause in there to put it in your lease. And just keep in mind too, that if you do remove all your trade fixtures, if that's allowable, you still might be required to compensate the owner for any damages caused or to repair the damage of like taking the lights off or the plumbing out of the floor, unless you take care of it. And like if you altered any of the electrical stuff, like the power, they might have you put it back to normal. I don't know. But Additionally, though, when you're signing a new lease, your landlord might give you a certain amount for build out or improvements because they just for an incentive for you to sign the lease to begin with, because they really want you in there. That happened to me one time. Yeah, I got, like, I think it was like $60,000 incentive that they would help with, that they would pay for. Anything above that, I would pay for, like new flooring, walls, paint, electricity, whatever it takes to get you up and going. That's negotiable. Okay. One other thing is keep in mind that leases are written by landlords and they tend to favor the landlord. So make sure that you are reading that small print, that fine print that's on there. And if you don't understand it, you need to take it to your legal advisor and have them tell you what it means. Because the last thing you want, I know when you're getting in there and you're excited about opening a salon. I did the first time. I went in there with rose-colored glasses on. I was so excited. I didn't read anything. And I was like, where do I sign? Get me in there. Luckily, nothing terrible happened, but you don't know what you're signing because you're all excited. So just read the small print. Make sure you don't sign anything without knowing what you're signing, knowing what you're getting into. If you're going to sign a 10-year lease, remember, that's a 10-year lease. Now, if you have an attorney, they work in your favor, whereas the landlord's prioritizing their own interests, okay? So take your lease to your attorney and have them review it. They might find something that they might suggest, hey, have you thought about negotiating this? Heck, they might even negotiate it for you. I don't know. If you're not good at negotiation or you feel a little bit small doing that, I know because it's kind of an uncomfortable situations, find yourself a commercial real estate person to help you with this. That's what they get paid for. I mean, it might cost a little bit, but it's better than not going to bat for yourself. Anyway, look, maybe you're brand new to this game, or maybe you're opening your second or third or something. The lease is definitely one document you don't want to skim over. Okay. Now, if I know that talking about leases is not, like I said, the sexiest subject, but it's very, very important. And if you're looking for something more in depth on this subject, you'll definitely want to get on our waiting list for our course, the $1 Million Salon Blueprint. The link's in our show notes. And we are in the final stages of getting our course online. I'm so excited. Plus, we're also going to get it printed as a book. I am so excited about this. So anyway, thanks for listening. And remember, when you know better, you do better.